I can just say that those of us who have joined us, we decided we will do like a conversation, our presentation. So we are 4 of us, and we are just going to share our thoughts and then have a conversation with you. So it's also a conversation among us and with you. So we have Rosalba, who has a lot of experience working at the ISS. And being part of the diversity work in many other spaces. And we have Sarah, who is part of our communications marketing team, but also have a lot of experience in thinking about and working on diversity inclusion issues. Then we have the third person who's joining us is Amod. Amod is our PhD student at ISS and again, part of our team. Have been with us in many of the similar conversations. And then me, I am Sreerekha. I'm leading, kind of coordinating the project on behalf of ISS, though I relatively do not have that long experience with ISS, which Rosalba has. So for that reason, Rosalba has headed our diversity team and being part of ISS for more than a decade. So I requested her to actually start the conversation today to talk about the ISS experience. And then the 3 of us, the first part, when we have Olivier, since the conversation, the project, the conference now is divided into 2 sessions and there's a 10 minutes break in between. So the first part, Rosalba will start and then I would follow. And in the second, after the break, we have Sarah and Amod joining us to continue the conversation. Just wanted to share that with you, and I would hand over to Rosalba.
Thank you very much, Sri. When you say that I have a lot of experience, yes, it's true, but it means that I'm older. So no. I hope that I'm wiser, but I don't think so. Anyway, so what I'm going to share with you are images, because I cannot speak about ISS and my experience of ISS, and also talk about what we are bringing to this project without showing some of the images that has marked me deeply as a person, as an academic, as a feminist. So allow me to share my screen and see if all works well. You never know with these technologies. So please, can anybody tell me if you can see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So the idea is that I'm going to go, the idea is that I'm going to go through this presentation and I will be sharing some thoughts, and then Sri will follow, and of course we will open the rest of the time that we have for your questions, comments, anything that you want to share. So let me start by saying that, as Sri was saying, I come here as someone that has been doing research, mainly collaborative research on the state of diversity, or let's say lack of diversity in the Dutch academy. Not only within ISS, which is specifically located as part of the Erasmus University, but also for one of the oldest universities in Europe, that is the University of Amsterdam, which I think was founded in 1632. So I have been involved in trying to understand why basically in the Netherlands, when we talk about inclusive education, we're constantly speaking about people that is not basically from the Netherlands, and how this particular understanding of inclusive education is very much focused on how we look, the skins that we have, the ethnicity that we are identified with, but very rarely focus on the knowledges that we have, the experiences, and of course our stories. So this is what I wanted to share with you. Start from there, saying the way in ISS that we speak about diversity aims to go beyond what we understand now, a demographic understanding of diversity and inclusiveness in higher education. Now, why for us this is important? Well, basically because we are conscious that ISS has a particularly interesting and problematic past. ISS was founded in 1952, and you can see some of these pictures in the screen. And ISS was part of a response to the decolonization process and the dismantling of the Dutch colonial rule in Indonesia. So ISS emerged so many years ago to train civil servants with the idea that they will somehow adopt a policy-oriented, multidisciplinary approach to the needs of what in that moment in ISS was described as developing countries. Today, and perhaps you have seen our brochures, ISS defines itself as a postgraduate institution that brings together students and teachers from the global south and the global north in an European environment. And in that capacity, we are offering MA and PhD degrees in international development studies. We also have a joint MA in public policy, and our research program is focused on global development and social justice. And every year we attract numerous researchers from everywhere in the world. So ISS, from my experience, is an encounter of plurality of nationalities, life experiences, knowledge trajectories, pedagogical traditions that have converged here and make of ISS a very interesting and a very particular space, not only in the Netherlands, but also in Europe and in the global north. So from that perspective, we are doing great in terms of inclusivity, right? There is like heaven. Even if you see our numbers, our faculty tends to be much more women. If you see the researchers that are here, most of them are female researchers, or that identify as female. Most of our MA students come from Asia, and most of our MA students are also identify themselves as female. And we have a diversity and inclusion policy in place, but that is part of what we are. But like I was saying, we are not totally, we are conscious, let's say, that this is one part of diversity and inclusive education, because we're also conscious that in many universities and research centers across the world, we have been facing public scrutiny on the role that institutions like ISS have historically played to silence plurality in approaches to knowledge production, for creating inclusive environments where everybody, and not just some, feel at home. And this is the case in ISS of colonial amnesia. We are really having conversations, but also interventions within our curricula on how to go back to the past of ISS in a way that illuminates how can we address the colonial amnesia. And in the context of international development studies and practice, this means that we are looking into the recurrent blind spots, the institutional erasures, which are very remarkable and as unacceptable in these days. This is the case of enslavement. This is the case of the colonial genocide, colonial encounter, that for many of us at ISS created the need for development and international solidarity, or so-called international solidarity in the first place. So in very concrete terms, in our own classroom, and Sri is also going to talk about that, in our research at ISS that deals with inclusive education, this has meant that we are challenging the silence around race and racism. That is something very important for us in the context of the Netherlands, where some 10 years ago this was simply unthinkable. But we're not only on that side of the equation, we're also trying to abandon capacity building, poverty reduction focus towards discussing more about reparations, restitution, and practices for the regeneration of life and earth. Now, we were asked in preparing this small presentation, what are going to be ISS contributions? And what I can say from my perspective is that as the status of colonizers are falling everywhere, at least in Western Europe and other places around the world, we are, as I mentioned before, reflecting our implications in the reproduction of racial hierarchies at the core of our disciplines, categories, pedagogies we work with. And we are interested in reassessing our knowledge generation practices in relation to their colonial and imperial past. So we are taking very seriously these legacies, these calls for the transformation of our curricula and our pedagogical practices. And what we think that we can contribute as an institution to this particular project are related to the following 2 points. First, we are particularly interested in questioning international development as inclusive education that is only focusing on the demographic representation of that diversity. We really want to bring our trust. This will be the second point on the value of shared stories and how these are need to be told and retold from those in their own voices, from those who are constantly made absent, silenced, or made less relevant. And the third thing that I think ISS can bring to this particular project is that we are exceptionally positioned, I think so, to start leading the transformation of claims for inclusive education beyond its demographic dimension. I think that we have a lot of experience right now in the classroom, but also in research, to bring the cognitive or the knowledge dimension of inclusive education, and that, in other words, mean actually engaging with questions around whose knowledge counts, how we teach about that knowledge, for what purposes, and who benefits. And yeah, this is what I have to share in these 8 minutes, I think so, that it took me to walk with you through the very fast story of ISS. Sri.
Thank you, Rosalba. I will try to share the screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So a lot of things which Rosalba already brought in. So that's really makes it easier for me. So some of the parts of what I wanted to say, I'm just going to quickly go through them. At ISS, as Rosalba mentioned, as a development studies and international institution, we have we have a special space that, unlike many other international institutions in the global north, which I have been part of, ISS is more truly international in the sense that we have a small institution, but we have people coming from all over the world, very diverse. But that, for that same reason, we think as a higher education institution, we need to understand the history of higher education institutions, and how we need to then, that creates a space to actually critically look at development as an institution which focuses on development, and maybe think about the possibilities of unlearning or relearning about history and politics of development, and how also thinking about how we want to talk about colonial capitalism, how we want to be understood within the agenda of development. So what are then the advantages for us in being in this space, as I mentioned, is that we are part of the, in some sense, we are located in the global north, so we are part of this academia in the contemporary neoliberal space. And all over the globe, we see a space in which there is increasing, the challenges of increasing levels of racialization, in the contemporary space, colorism, white supremacy, caste supremacy, especially for Asians. We have a good number of Asian students to come here, and there are more also in the global north studying, and so talking about caste supremacy, and then bringing that into the classroom to see what, classroom, we do want to critically look at classroom as a space, not just where everyone comes in and they are there, but we also want to look at the hierarchies within that of a space, and how we want to kind of deconstruct that and to look at the experience of a classroom. As a feminist who teaches feminist epistemologies and methodologies, for me, it's important to bring in that approach into thinking about diversity and inclusion. So I always look forward to listening from others, learning about new methodologies, new epistemologies, and ways of thinking, bringing a feminist approach to inclusivity and diversity, and making sure that gender only is not only about women who are part of a feminist discourse, but the plurality of that gender and multiple genders, considering and also addressing the colonial history, and then how to bring that multiple voices to be heard in talking about it. And for me as a brown woman, I am, someone who was born and brought up in India and lived my life there, but then I moved to being part of Global North, teaching in the University of US in the US for a few years, and then moving to Netherlands. So I have experienced this multiple spaces of classrooms with diverse students, in the past many years, and I had intense experiences. So unlike many brown or Black people who actually are born and brought up and taught and learned, went to schools in the Global North, then becoming part of it. For me, it's a different, I have the advantage, I believe, that of coming from actually living in the Global South and then becoming part of faculty, which kind of helps me. And I would like to get those experience from others too, to bring in that, into the center. So in the feminist politics and epistemology, that is very important. And so that connects me to the bringing in the aspects of looking at othering, reflexivity of a person, and also mainly the question of how we represent, and how we speak for the other, and those central questions into the space of diversity and inclusion. And we want to address some of the very challenging questions which are historically asked by scholars and political thinkers and feminists who have worked in the field of diversity and inclusion, to how good to go beyond just seeing the diversity or difference, but to look at how individuals have experienced it. If you move to a Global North, we have Black feminist scholars or post-colonial feminists have written about suddenly becoming hyper-visible or invisible or simultaneously experiencing those things. And then the challenges related to that as a person who comes from a diverse, from a non-white background, mainly as a central part of it. So those questions are, I believe, important for us. And we want to then understand inclusion as a process, not just to think about diversity or the questions of hierarchies within that, but we want to learn those experiences to look at within ourselves. We want to look at how to have a possibility to reassess, taking us back to our own spaces, going beyond our individual experiences, but connecting into larger structural issues, and then to look at, understand the political economy of inequality. So it is not, many times we see the limitation that when the moment you say diversity, it gets limited to the identity of a person or an individual experience and sharing of a story. That is very important, and we want to but take it forward from there. How do we then go beyond our individual experience to look at how that is shaped by the larger structural institutional issues in economy? So student life, it's how students look at it and the lessons that's important for us. So whether it's me or a student coming to the Global North, there are these new experiences they go through. And I think it's important for us to learn from those experiences. And that then when they go back as students to their own homes, how do they, what have they learned from it, and how can they practice those lessons in locations where they belong to, or as anyone, not just students, but anyone who kind of take it back home. So internalizing the process, and then to understand diversity and recognize sometimes that helps us to actually bring that in our own, looking at rethinking about our own privileges in our own location. A big challenge, and I would end with this part, that a challenge we have felt is that most of the time there is a question of, there can be conversations on diversity, but it can be into a box, and we can become symbols of it without meaningfully looking at it. And always appropriation of concepts have been a challenge for it, whether it's empowerment or development or anything we can think of, or even decolonization, which I have recently been talking with Rosalba. So diversity also have the risk of being appropriated, in the sense that you can just be a face, and you need to then change yourself to fit into that space which is given to you. And then you might be again get disciplined and trained how to actually be a good phase within the diversity which is acceptable, and not to break that and challenge it. So those questions also, I think, are extremely important for us to take up. In this project, the two goals we are, things which we are trying to achieve is, as earlier mentioned in the introduction panel, that we want to think about an online course and to bring in the experiences and and also learn together with others, and then also think about a documentary as a collective journey and to have a visual meaning to the storytelling experience. So I would end with saying that for us, all of these questions are any institution. It's not just for students or for faculty, but for the staff, for everyone who's part of it, to different levels of the institution, then how to bring them together. And then maybe also a central question is to be able to think about colonization, recolonization, bringing that story into the picture of diversity, because they are central to it. Also, in order to break the myth of global north, or the developed world, look into within the global north, increasing issues of poverty and inequality within that, which is important for us to bring in stories of diversity and inclusion. So I would end there. I hope I haven't taken too much time. And I would like to have the rest of the time for discussion within the group.
How much time we still have, Sri?
It says we have 7 minutes, 7 and 20 seconds. We would like to hear from you, especially those who are not in the Netherlands or others who are working in the similar field, but would like to learn from you some questions and concerns or any suggestions, thoughts. We have Sarah and Amod here who will also speak after the break, adding to our conversation, but please do share anything like. Please go ahead, Aisha.
Hi, I don't have anything profound or any insight. I'm just what really resonated with me is when you was talking about inclusion as a process that goes beyond the individual to the collective. And when you said that, that just basically made me think, aha, this is what I've been struggling with, because I run consciousness raising, inclusion workshops with tutors and some students as well in an art college in Amsterdam. And part of it is getting people's individual stories out, their perspectives, and talking about positionality and how, nothing is neutral, we're positioned. But I really struggle to put that in a collective. I really struggle with that last part.
Yeah.
But maybe I do have a question actually. To do this work, do we have to necessarily have an understanding, a shared collective understanding of white supremacy? And I mean, not exactly the same understanding, but for example, I work with people who just are like they just deny their white privilege, like I'm not privileged just because I'm white, etc. And I just wonder, is it that they can learn through this storytelling, this story sharing process, or do we need to do the work of explaining what white privilege, what white supremacy is before we do this kind of inclusion story-based work? That's my question.
Shall I respond, Rosalba? Do you?
You can go, or I can go, whatever you want.
I will go. Just quickly say something. Maybe you can also add to it. I think white privilege, considering the history of the world, is an issue which we couldn't not talk about it, and also see how that is connected to global political economy and the history of political economy and the contemporary political economy. How development's own history So talking about white privilege, and then what would help us is to go beyond individual, as I said again, to look at the structure, just the way we look at patriarchy, and we don't say men, but we also see women who are patriarchal and contributing to the system of patriarchy. In a similar way, we would connect individual stories to the structure. And I think that helps us, but in multiple locations. In my location, for example, I need to talk about Ramanical supremacy. So in different locations, we need to bring and connect that to the local histories and how its own development adds different dimensions to it. But globally, yes, US imperialism, or, there are multiple colonial history, slavery, it definitely forces us to think about white privilege. Rosalba, you want to?
Yeah, I'm also a feminist, and I make choices every day in my aula. I never talk about white supremacy. It takes away the energy and the attention that I want to dedicate in my aula to actually understand the structures of oppression that in some cases might be very clearly identified as in relation to a political economy of inclusion. In other contexts, especially in the context of ISS, might be in relation to a combination of material and epistemic structures of oppression, and something in between, let's put it in those terms. So I don't engage consciously with discussions of white supremacy. This doesn't mean that we don't talk about the role that colonialism and imperialism has played in the constitution of institutions like ISS, but all the higher education system to be the way they are, that for particular people might be violent spaces and spaces that are not welcoming. In my classrooms, I spend much more time, but this is ISS. I also will need to emphasize that, to discuss how to go beyond that systems of oppression. Without ignoring them, but without dedicating all the time to students to educate, unpack, deconstruct, analyze what it is. But this is my personal choice. Why? Because in this work, as you are saying, thankfully, I have other colleagues who are very much focusing on unpacking colonial capitalism and colonial capitalism, but all other systems of oppression. So I'm much more focusing on, okay, and what is beyond? And there is always a beyond. Now, in terms of positionality, I think that one thing that is happening in the Netherlands, but this is my experience as a researcher of inclusive education, is that it has been completely misunderstood as an exercise in locating individually who you are. But positionality, let's say from a post-colonial, decolonial feminist perspective, is always a relationship with historical structures of oppression and privilege. And therefore, these are situated and are concrete and mark us differently. Therefore, the work of inclusive education is also specific and differentiated. The labor of who is going to educate who is also specific and differentiated. But I know that there is a lot of problems now in the Netherlands in how positionality is being taught as, something that is just about yourself.
Sorry, we have to leave the group now.
Oh, sorry.
We don't have much time left. So I want to say thank you for the questions, and hopefully we can continue the conversation in the next coming panels. Okay. There is no,